Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening from whatever time zone you may be joining us in from today. My name is Rebecca Cronin, and I'm one of the customer success managers here with the Altair Data Analytics team. Now, you might recognize my voice or my name from either participating in some of our complimentary onboarding sessions or perhaps seeing my name within the user community. The customer success team, we're here as another point of contact for you to reach out to at any time with any questions or concerns you may have regarding Altair solutions, as well as if you're unable to get a hold of your account manager. We can also provide assistance in granting you access into our online user community. And if you're unaware about the user community, I encourage you to go and register to participate. It's a way to connect with fellow peers, with our product experts, opportunity to post and answer discussion questions, as well as other various helpful resources for enablement. And if you have any question regarding the user community or any other Altair processes solutions, you can reach us at da-csm@altair.com. So again, we're very excited you're joining us today for Altair Data Analytics Ask the Expert session. As it is, our goal is to help provide you with some more enablement with the solutions that you have. Our agenda today, we did have it targeted to have an open session. However, I think some of our peers were unable to share some of that information. So we're going to change the schedule where we're going to touch on report redaction so that the next time you'll be able to share that information. And sorry, there's a duplication. This should actually say macros and DPS, so I apologize for that error. So that being said, in the handout section, it's a copy of today's PowerPoint. Again, that should say we're going to cover macros in Data Prep Studio, as well as report redaction. And then I know one of the comments was to kind of touch on additional trapping, so we'll touch on that. And then, of course, as always, you have the question panel where you could submit, or the chat panel to submit any questions that you have to us. If you'd like them to be answered offline and private, then please add that to your comment. Otherwise, we'll share the question with those in attendance, as well as feel free, you can raise your hand, and if you want, when it comes to the open mic, you can openly share your question. And if we don't get a chance to get to your question, we will follow up with an email within 2 to 3 business days. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to our expert. It's Steve Caiels. Steve is one of our senior professional service consultants. He's been with the organization for over 20-some years in a technical support role with 29+ years. He started off as pre-sales consultant with training specialty under his belt over in the EMEA to his current role as senior professional service consultant. He's been tremendous assistance to both our customers and us internally here at Altair. And if you haven't had the benefit to work with him directly, you may have seen his participation and assistance to our user community. So with no further ado, I am going to turn it over to Steve. And let's just make him presenter. And we'll dive right in.
Thanks, Rebecca.
So I see your blue screen with the classic D mod showing.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Yep, so there, as Rebecca mentioned, we've got a couple of topics to go through today. First two are fairly quick, the macros, and then I'll cover report redaction, which may be useful if you do want to send information either for a future Ask the Expert session or to tech support or to colleagues. It may be relevant there. And then onto a sort of general trapping overview where we might be able to use floating traps or other techniques if the reports aren't behaving quite as we'd like them to. So I'm going to start off just reviewing the macro. Let's open this up in Data Prep Studio. So macros are a Data Prep Studio only function. If some of you may have been using predefined functions or user-defined functions in Monarch Classic, similar in sort of concept to predefined functions in Classic, but implemented in a slightly different way in Data Prep Studio. So let's take a look and see what they are and where they can hopefully be useful. So a very simple report here. This is the entire report just to show some of the features that we can do here. And you can see the first name and the last name. There's some sort of pollution and just, weird formatting in these two fields. So we're just going to do a macro to tidy up the first name field and then apply that macro to the last name field, just as an example. So the function of the macro itself is not particularly important. It's the concepts of how to use it that we want to go through. So I'm just going to do a very quick detailed template here. Not going to talk about too much on what I'm doing with the trapping, because we will have a quick session on trapping in a moment or two. Just going to highlight a couple of fields here. We'll have a date field, European date format, of course, and a numeric field. Just name them. Okay, so just before accepting that, I'm just checking that the field types are as I'm expecting. So we've got two character fields on the first name and last name. A date field we can see on the hire date in European format, and of course a numeric on the salary. Everything's looking good there. Going to do a quick report verify. Although on a tiny report like this, we can visually verify it, and that wasn't a genuine mistake, but you can see the advantage of the report verify here. It's showing me I've truncated a field. So I'm just going to extend that a little bit and apply it. Verify again, and now we see the verify complete. So the data's looking good, and we can pop into the prepare window. So what we can see on the prepare window here is a table that's got, of course, exactly what we see in the report. And we can see those various formatting that we want to fix or potentially want to fix on the first name and the last name field. Things like there's a double space here, so you can see that a little bit more in the report itself. There's two spaces here. The capitalization is not how we want it. There's extra non-alpha characters and numeric characters, and there's a mixture of dashes and spaces or multiple spaces. So 4 or 5 different functions that we might want to apply here to get the name into a decent format. Now, of course, we can do all those individually on the column by right-clicking. So if I want to capitalize the first character of each field, for example, I can do a right-click case, make a proper case. And you can see the B there. If you watch that, that'll, if I undo that change, the B goes back to a lowercase b and the A on the Alana are changing. So yeah, we can apply these changes, and if we want to apply lots of changes to other fields, we can drag those either one by one down onto other fields, or we can drag an entire change list. And it obviously doesn't make too much sense to do that again on there, but if I was dragging this back onto another field or back onto another table, we can drag the entire change list. But I can't sort of cherry pick various changes or apply lots of changes in one go from the change history, not without sort of exporting it and re-importing it and these sorts of things. So if I've got a set of functionality that I want to apply to either lots of columns in this table or lots of columns in any other table, excuse me, in any future session of Data Prep Studio as well, then the macros can be useful. So I'm going to undo those 2 changes here and instead do this through a macro. So we can get to macros either by right-clicking on a column and then coming down to the macro, add, edit macros, or we can use this icon up in the top corner here, this open library icon, and that will take us into a shared library and macro screen, where you can see at the moment we don't have any macros defined. So instead of applying the changes directly to the first name column, I'm going to create a macro and then apply that macro to the first name and last name columns here. So we're going to add a macro. The macros are column type specific. So I'm going to start off, this is of course going to be a text-based macro. And you can see, rather than seeing the actual report here, we can see a sample of various different field types. Again, we've got sort of capitalization we can look at. There's 2 spaces here, maybe a little bit difficult to see, but there are 2 spaces here. Nulls, alphanumeric characters and those sorts of things. So we'll go through a quick set of steps, just add 4 or 5 changes that we can do here. First of all, I'll sort the capitalization out to make the first character an uppercase. So make proper case. That capitalizes the first character of each word. And then we'll just do a little bit more tidying up. So let's collapse down the extra spaces. So that's a clean collapse option. Now I can tidy up these sort of bad characters in here. This might be something that's coming in from OCR, for example, something like that. So we can just remove characters we don't want. So again, that's going to be a clean operation, remove non-alphanumeric. And then we can specifically remove numeric. And that's probably getting sort of fairly close to it. Maybe we might want to do something with nulls. This wouldn't be a problem from a report file, but if you're opening up database or CSV files or something like that, then you might want to maybe replace the nulls with spaces or blank fields, even probably more than spaces. So just a sequence, doesn't really matter too much what they're doing. That's what we're going to apply to these 2 fields here. So we can OK that. You can see, I'll just name it. Go back in and edit that and change the name. And we don't have to specifically save it. We can just close this library down. And the macros that we've defined are not associated with the workspace. So we don't need to save. If I close Data Prep Studio down straight away now, that macro is defined and it's saved. There's nothing else I need to do. So to apply that macro, we can just right click, come down to macros, and there's the tidy name macro that I've just created. And you can see now it immediately adds all those 5 steps. I mean, it's maybe there's something we need to change here, but you can see it's added those 5 steps that we defined in the macro just directly straight away to that field. So of course I could do a right click and apply it to the last name column as well. But there is something here you can see that maybe isn't doing exactly what we intended it to do. So if I undo these steps here, you can see that was Mary Lou with a hyphen there. Probably what we might want to see is either to retain the hyphen or to put a space in there. But what we probably don't want to do is to truncate it and get rid of the space straight away. So of course we are free to change the change history here, make any changes that you want. Although they've all been brought in as a group and as a macro, they are individual changes. So what I may want to do here is to retain the space. Is I should probably change that hyphen to a space. Now you can see at the moment that space is already gone. It's been taken out by one of these changes here. If I undo all these changes, and then now I add a new change to replace that hyphen to a space, all of these are going to disappear. So this is the way the change history works. Nothing to do with macros. This is just a general, the way the change history works. Anything that's grayed out, if you add a new change onto here, there could be changes down here that were still active, but anything from the first grayed out upwards will be removed. So I don't want to do my change here straight away, because then I suppose all I need to do is to reapply the macro. But if you imagine this macro was part of a larger sequence, I might not want to redo that. So what I can do is I can apply all those changes again. Now I can retrospectively change the hyphen to a dash. So now I can do my right click, replace, using find and replace, change the hyphen to a space. Now, of course, that change is too late in my change history. So to make that actually work, I'm going to have to drag this down and position it so that it's before the remove non-alphanumeric characters. So now we fixed it. Now you can see the spaces in there. So it was the hyphen. We've changed it to a space and then removed all the characters that we don't want. Now, of course, I can change that in the macro instead. So if we want to apply that same sort of customization in the future, rather than modifying the change history, I would probably want to come back in and modify the macro itself. So I'll undo those, come back into the macro, edit the macro. Unfortunately, we can't drag and drop and rearrange this order here. So what I need to do in the macro screen is delete the step that's that I don't want. So the remove non-alphanumeric characters is the one that's causing the issue, or the one that's being applied out of sequence. So I need to delete that. Now I can apply my replace using find and replace to replace the hyphen with the space. And now, of course, I can put my clean remove non-alphanumeric characters back in again. And now when I apply the macro, of course, the new macro is going to be applied to it. And if I apply the same thing to the second. Okay, so that's really it. It's a very quick session in terms of creating macros. There's a couple of other points I want to make about it, but in terms of creating macros, that's really all you need to do. You can either do the right click, come down to macros, or you can come up to the library and that'll take you to exactly the same screen. You can, of course, have multiple macros, and as I mentioned, the macros are field type specific. So if I right click on the hire date column here and come down to macros, you can see my tidy name does not appear because we've got a date time field and it's a character based macro. If I change this to a character field and now do the right click macros, you'll see that the tidy name is available. Of course, in this case, it's going to absolutely remove everything from that field because there are no normal alphabetical characters there. So if I didn't intend to do that, then I've got the undo. So with the change history, you can either sort of undo individual changes by clicking the back arrow. And if you click on a back arrow halfway through the list, anything from that arrow upwards will be undone. Or there's a group, a sort of an operation-based undo. So you'll notice there's 19 changes here. If I undo my last action, which was to apply the macro, then all 6 of those changes get undone and will get removed from that change history in one go. And if I undo it one more time, then this will go back to a date time field. In terms of sharing macros, then you can do that. You can define these and pass them to your colleagues or vice versa, of course. So if we come into the library here, you'll see at the moment I've just got this tidy name macro. These are stored in an external file. As I mentioned, they're not part of the workspace, so we don't need to save the workspace. There's no association at all between the workspace and the macros. But if we look at the users public documents, and you'll find there's an Alt Monarch group in your public documents once you've installed Data Prep Studio or Monarch Complete. This personal macros here, you can see I've not had to save it at any stage, but again, with the European date format, you can see this is dynamically being updated as and when I make changes to my macros. So if you want to share this with a colleague, all you need to do is to copy these, and I'll just rename it. It doesn't have to be called shared, it can be called anything. Let's try that again. So all you need to do is to make this available either on a network drive or any method you like, make this available to your colleagues. What they'll be able to do then, if they don't have their own macros, so let me delete that to get rid of it, is they'll be able to come into this shared section here, edit the shared path, browse. This shared macros collection will be there, but by default it has an empty path. So I'm just going to pick that file up. And now you can see this shared macro. If you're imagining a colleague has sent that file or it's on a network or something like that, then that's available to any user that has access to that file path now. Notice I can't change this. So if you want to make changes to it, then you can select it and import them to personal. So now I have it in my shared path that I'm not able to change, but also in my local shared files. I just changed the name of this to local. I won't make any changes, but of course I could. And now when we have a new field or in a new table, remember, it doesn't have to be part of this workspace. You'll see the macros. You'll have this shared macros, which we're not able to edit, but also because I copied it locally, then I've got a copy of this in my local tidy name here. So that's it on the macros. Useful if you have a sort of a consistent step of changes that you want to make. I suppose the limitations are that you can only apply them to a single field type, so you're not able to sort of make some changes and then do a conversion to a different field type, and then carry on making changes as part of the change history, or as part of the macro, I should say. So you'd have to have a sort of a step 1 on the first field type, and then you'd have to manually change that to the new field type and then apply a sort of a step 2 macro to it. But apart from that, then you know, that's what they're for, just allowing you to make changes easily and quickly. So I'm just going to quickly check if there are any questions at this stage. I don't see any questions coming in on the macros. So again, remember, you don't need to save the workspace. They're not associated with the workspace. So I can just close, but it's going to ask me if I want to save the workspace in an unrelated way. But if I say no to that, you can see my shared macros are still saved. Everything's there, and I can carry on in the normal way. So if there's no questions, I'll move on to the second aspect, which was just to quickly mention some report redaction that we can have in Monarch Classic. So report redaction is only available in Monarch Classic, and the main reason for mentioning this is just if it helps you send data to us, either for an Ask the Expert session, or if you have some support issues and you want to send a report structure, but you're not able to because of privacy concerns. So let me open up a different report here in Classic. So remember, this is only for Monarch Classic. We don't have the report redaction in Data Prep Studio. We have redaction, but we're not able to export the report window, which is specifically the window that you need to export if you're trying to send us a redacted version of the report. So with report redaction, what we are able to do is to redact any field that is extracted from the report. So it can be a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, which I'll come on to just when it's loaded in a second or two. May have opened that twice, so apologies while it just sorts itself out. There we go. So we do need a model, and we do need to extract the, or we do need to have defined the fields that we want to redact. So there's a model I've already got here, just extracting the data. So what we can see on the first part of this screen here is everything's looking okay, but on the second part of the screen, you can see things are drifting around here. And I'll come on to this as the third subject in a moment or two. So what we're imagining, I guess, is that we want to be able to send this report, but with these fields redacted. So something to be conscious of if you're doing that is I can redact the fields, but of course, for this particular issue, the issue is that we're not able to trap these lines using the normal techniques. So if you're trying to send us this, and the report is not already extracting the data, just need to be a little bit careful to make sure it is redacting the bits that you need redacted. So in this case, maybe I want to redact the label number. Maybe that's the only secret thing in this particular report. I can do a right click, redact field, and then just X over text. There's lots of options here, which we'll come on to obviously, but if I do an X over text, you can see this data is now redacted, and I can export this. But because this information here is not extracted and is not highlighted as part of the field, then you can of course see the stuff that's left behind is not redacted there. So just be a little bit careful if you're sending this out to third parties, including us, of course. We're happy to sign any non-disclosure agreements that you need signed, but if you're still not able to do that, then just make sure that you don't have this situation where data is not being redacted and you're expecting it to be redacted. So it can be a little bit sort of chicken and egg. If the problem is that you're not able to define the field, then you won't be able to redact it before sending it to us. So a little bit of a safety net you do have there is if I come in here, or actually let me just describe a couple of other redaction options before I do that, just a moment or two. So the other problem with redacting is that of course we lose the patterns. So if I redact this ship date, for example, and I use the X over text, No, the very thing that we might want to trap on and might help us to solve the problem is the fact that we know this third character of a date is the slash character, but of course we've lost that as part of the redaction. So it can be very difficult to come up with a solution if you use the X over text. So if it's possible, rather than using X over text, if you do the either X over digits, in which case you can see it will leave the formatting, so X over digits on an amount. Oh, I used non-blanks actually instead of digits, sorry, my mistake. Let me try that again. So X over digits will leave the formatting and make it easier for us to come up with a solution. But obviously that's not going to work if you've got character-based functions. So the other option there is to use the X over non-blanks. And that's not great because we lose the fact that there's a comma at the end of this first word, which obviously we can no longer see. But at least it gives us the structure of the report, and in conversation with you, we may be able to come up with a solution. Though to get over this problem where the trap is not working and therefore the fields are not extracted, what we can do is close down the model, in this case completely. So I'm just going to close the model, so that now nothing is extracted. We can build a new detail template. Oops, I must have done something wrong there. My apologies. Let me try that again. New template detail. Okay. And we can leave the trap line completely blank. So what Monarch does by default is if you don't specify a trap, then it will extract from every line. So you can see every line has got a chevron here. And because we're not doing a trap, we can be 100% confident that every single line is going to be impacted by the change I'm about to make. We can now just highlight one big Y field across the entire length of the report. Maximum field width is 254 characters. So if your report is very wide, you would then need to, if you imagine this was, I've got to the maximum of 254, I just do whatever I can, and then I create another field for the next part, all the way down across. So this is now 2 fields instead of 1 field. What we can now do, of course, because every single line is highlighted, is I can come out of report design, and I can now apply the redacted field. Now, the only one that's going to make any sense here is to X over non-blanks. And you remember I defined that as 2 fields, so I'm going to need to do my redact X over non-blanks again. So now you can be absolutely sure that everything is redacted, but we at least get the structure of the report. So this may or may not be helpful, and may or may not help us to resolve the issues. But if you really can't send the data to us, then this is probably as good as we can get. Being absolutely 100% comfortable that everything is redacted. Once you've got it to this stage, or any stage you can get to, you can then do a right-click, export report, either as a PDF or as text. Text will be easier. And then, of course, we can export this wherever we want. I'll just go onto the desktop. And then we can run the export. And here's the redacted notepad file, which, as you'd expect, is exactly what we saw in the report window. So absolutely no way we can recover anything from here, and that's about as secure as we can get. So that was a quick mention, more in terms of sort of for future sending data to us, more than a question that's specifically been asked. So there is a question just come in here. Let me just review that quickly. Redact verify. So yeah, so my colleague has answered that as well. That there is no redact verify. So the only way of being absolutely sure that everything is verified is to not have a trap in your detail templates. I don't think there's any way around that, because sort of the nature of the way the redaction is working is that it's redacting a field. So if your field is not defined, there'd be no way of verifying that. Okay. So moving on to the final section then, which is used in that same report that I've just verified, but of course I'll use the unverified version, and I'll open it back up in Data Prep Studio. So the question that we had in the follow-up last week was to sort of have a discussion about trapping, but unfortunately we weren't able to get a copy of the data because of privacy reasons. So it's going to have to be a sort of a theoretical, these are the sorts of things you can do, which hopefully will help. And if not, we'll need to look at other ways we can get the data, and either, obviously in a more private session, we can look at that in more detail. So I think I wanted to sort of make it clear that we don't usually have to sort of delve into trapping too much, because what we hope and what we see is that reports tend to be fairly neat and tidy, and in those cases that the trapping is very straightforward. So I just wanted to quickly mention that at the beginning of this session, so that I don't give the impression that we always need to use sort of strange techniques to extract the data. So what we can see on this first page is everything's nice and neat and tidy, and I'll just deal with a detailed template on this one, but the same would apply to appends as well. So everything's neat and tidy on this first page. So if our entire report was like this, of course, it would be very straightforward. We just create the detailed template. Everything's in a nice neat column. I've got unit prices here, and I've got amounts with a decimal in the same column. So all I need to do is to come up and type in either one of those, doesn't matter which one I use, and then highlight the fields that I want to extract. For example, let's say we want these fields here, and that's it. That's the job done. So again, I've truncated data here by doing it too quickly. Let me re-highlight that. And you can see, I've got my blanks in the CD here because there's blanks in the report, but just making sure I'm on the right field. We can use this copy value from previous record. And there's all the data, everything's extracted. I won't rename the fields just on this first run through. So, these are the sorts of things. This is always the first thing to look for. If you have something specific that you can trap on, then certainly go for that. And, we don't necessarily need to jump to using, these wildcard trap characters or the floating trap characters that I'm going to come on to. So the first level of trapping is what we would call a specific or a literal trap character. And that's something that we type on the keyboard. Note that we don't have to trap on a field we're extracting, and this can make life a lot easier when we're trying to sort of solve problems that are not quite as straightforward as this. So I'm trapping on the unit price, even though I'm only extracting the amount, the media, and the quantity here. That works great for the first page, but as we scroll down through the report, we can see that everything starts going wrong on this next example. So here, of course, our unit price has drifted. The decimals are no longer in the same column, therefore my line is not being extracted. You can see we don't have the chevrons here, none of the fields are highlighted. Here we do have the unit price in the correct column, so the line is being extracted, but my amount field is drifting, and therefore it's being truncated. The verify would find this for us, of course, the truncation and the field drifting. So we need to look at how we can solve this, and there's lots of different ways. It's quite tempting to jump straight into using the floating trap here because that's sort of terminology we'd use. We might say these fields are drifting or floating left and right, therefore the floating trap springs to mind. But I personally prefer to try and avoid that if we can. And the sorts of situations where we might be able to avoid that is if there's only a couple of fields drifting and the rest of the report is behaving itself, then we can sort of concentrate on the rest of the report and use that to solve the issue rather than jumping straight to the floating trap. So my first port of call in this sort of situation would be to look somewhere else and to see if I can solve the two problems that we've got. And the first problem is that the trap is no longer working. So let's try and solve that problem first of all. So we know that the unit price and the amount are not reliable, so I'm not going to trap on anything over here to start with. But the first part of the report is reliable, and we do quite often see this, where only some parts of the report drift. So this is not hopefully too unrealistic, and it certainly makes life a lot easier. So I think it's worth exploring this first of all. So what we can see is that first 4 columns here are static. It's only the last 2 columns that are drifting. We already know that we don't have to trap above the columns we're extracting. So let's trap on something that's consistent. So we don't have any other literal trap characters here. There's no sort of decimal point or slash of a date or anything like that. But what we do have is the quantity column that's always going to be numeric. So the second port of call is to use these wildcards. And what we can see is that the numeric is going to be a nice, neat, reliable trap that's working on every single line. So in terms of trapping, that's almost done. But you can see it's also bringing in this phone number line, because coincidentally the phone number line is also has a numeric in that column. Lots of different ways we can get rid of that. For example, we can say the lines we do want are always numeric, followed by these 2 blanks here. I didn't mean to highlight that. Sorry, let me just delete that again. It's always numeric followed by these 2 blanks. So we can increase this pattern here, and you see as soon as I put this the blank trap in I'm about to use, the phone number line will disappear. Because of course the phone number is not numeric followed by blank, it's numeric followed by another number. So we could even increase that and be a little bit safer and say that the lines we do want are numeric followed by 2 blanks. But potentially, I suppose the phone number might also have a numeric followed by 2 blanks and be exactly the same pattern. So then, the next level that we've got would be to say, I'd probably keep the 2 blanks in here, to be honest, but we won't see it working if I do that. So I'm going to backspace up and get rid of the 2 blanks and go back into just having a numeric. So what we can say, rather than getting rid of the lines, or rather than keeping the lines that are numeric followed by 2 blanks, I want to get rid of the line that's got the colon or the word phone at the beginning. So I can, just by sort of visually highlighting this up here, I can work out that in about this position here on the line I don't want, I'm going to see a colon. And if I type that in, you can see now that I'm keeping the lines I do not want, and I'm dropping the lines I do want. But by reversing the logic of this one and turning it into a not trap, I can get the results I'm looking for. So by highlighting that field and then using this toggle the not state, I'm now saying I do want the lines that contain a numeric in this column and do not contain a colon in this column. And this is, this is a little bit more robust than just using a pattern of numerics and blanks. So we've got literal trap characters up to wildcard trap characters, up to maybe using the not trap character if you can. And if you can come up with a trap that's working, then that's great. That's the first part of the problem done. The next part of the problem is, are we able to highlight the fields reliably? So what we can see here is this 96. I'm going to have to come all the way up to the unit price here. So this is already telling me that I'm probably not going to get away with it. And we can see straight away that this is going to be an issue, because the second column here, the amount column, is overlapping the unit price column. So there is no way I can come up with a sort of a 2-field highlight here that's going to allow me to reliably extract these 2 fields. So we're getting to the stage where we might have to consider using the floating trap. But the floating trap brings its own issues, and if we can avoid using it, then personally I prefer to. So I'm just going to sort of go over one final thing we can do, which I would prefer to do in most situations rather than using the floating trap. So we can't highlight 2 fields neatly. So what we're going to have to do is to highlight these as a single field. And it's then relatively trivial to split these up into single fields once we get into our table window. Now, I think in this case, I can probably just about get away with highlighting these 2 fields. But again, you can see I'm having to get very close to overlapping the label number with the unit price and the amount. So what we would generally suggest is, go back to something that's consistent. We've already sort of said in this report, the label number is consistent. The first 4 columns are not drifting around. So we can use that to our advantage by actually grabbing the label number and the columns that drift all as a single field. And then we can split this up relatively easily once we get into the prepare window. So I'm just going to call this last 3. It's going to be a character field, of course. And now I can come into the table window, or the prepare window, I should say, table window in Monarch Classic, prepare window in Data Prep Studio. Functionality would be the same in both these cases, although splitting it is a little bit more involved in Monarch Classic. So what we can see now is we've got the last three all merged into one. Now there is an additional line here that I probably don't quite have time to go through, where if we look at the reports, you can see the report is being really nasty to us. And here we've got missing data from the reports. We've got no way looking at this data to know whether it's an amount or a unit price. So what I was hoping to have time to go through, and I don't think I'm quite going to get there, is to really sort of mention that there's not a lot we can do here in terms of extracting the data. We're going to have to use our business knowledge or make assumptions based on the data to work out whether this is a unit price or an amount. Or we're at least going to have to sort of know that this problem's here and abort the process, or sort of manually verify the process afterwards. So we'll have time to do that, I think, but possibly not come up with the calculations to fix it. But you can see here, looking at the report, we might be able to deduce that this is an amount because it's a big number, and this is a unit price because it's a small number. Or we might be able to sort of work something out based on the fact that, well, the quantity is 0 here, therefore we're likely to have a unit price, but we're not likely to have an amount. Now, obviously, these are business rules that are going to vary for any given report. But if you do have this sort of situation where you've got missing data, it can make life much more difficult if you're not able to use specific trap characters. But using either this technique of merging them together or using the floating trap doesn't really help. Neither of them has an advantage. So we're not losing anything by merging it together for this sort of situation. Let me just come back, and ignoring these two for the moment, to split these up. A couple of things we need to do. We need to clean it so that we go down to single spaces here. So we'll do a clean collapse. And now we've got everything looking a bit neater. We can do a right click, split into parts from the right, based on a space. And you can see what that's done at the moment is it's created 5 fields. Numbers a bit confusing here, but it's last 3 field 1 through to last 3 field 5. So we can see it's given us 5 different fields. And the reason it's done that is because some of these label numbers have spaces in. So we don't really want it split this way, of course. We only want to split it into 3 fields. So we can limit the split down to 2 splits, giving us 3 different fields. And then, of course, these last 2 are always going to be blank, so we'll remove that down. This really is always 1 more than the split limit if you're using the split limit. So now we do have our nice, neat 3 fields out here. We can identify this problem here. So, we could come up with calculations if there is logic we can apply. But for now, I think just we're going to have to sort of, because of time constraints, just say, well, if you've got nulls here, then there's something wrong that needs manual validation. But as I say, this is a problem regardless of whether you're using the merge technique or the floating trap technique. So personally, I prefer to use the merge technique because I think that avoids the issues that we're just about to see using the floating trap. I know some of my colleagues prefer to use the floating trap, and it is really personal preference more than anything else. So let's have a look at the floating trap options of doing this instead. So I'm just going to drag the same report in here again. So what we need to do on the floating trap is come in here, choose the sample, do the right click, create template detail, just as before. If we use the decimal point that we tried to use before, we know that works okay for all the ones where it's in the correct field position. But of course, it's not okay for all the other ones. Let me just replace that sample text to use one that's a little bit more representative. So this is working great for all the ones where my field is in the right place, but clearly it's not working on the ones where fields are drifting around. Now, if I use the floating trap straight away, you can see this is sort of making things worse to start with. So what's happening at the moment is it's now looking for that that decimal point or the period here, and it's defining the fields based on the position of the first period it gets to. And you can see we've got these periods in the description as well. So everything's moving around. This really should be my amount field, but because it's now being defined relative to the position of the decimal in the description, everything's moving around really badly. So the other option, the other problem we've got there is that you can't highlight a field through the period. No, that's not. I'm not going to be able to show that because it's trying to do it on this period here. But generally, when you're using the floating trap, you can't trap in the middle of a field. You either have to trap at the beginning of the field or on the bits in between the field. So I'm just going to delete all these fields here a second. And instead, we'll have to use a different trap. The other clue that it's not working as I expect is when I go back to use that decimal again, you can see my trap line has not changed to the yellow background, and it should be. Anything that's working well, you should find that your trap line has got the yellow background. So what we might now be thinking about is, okay, I can't trap in the middle of the field, so I'm going to have to use the numeric. But again, I'm not getting a yellow background here. And that's because we've also got numerics all the way up here as well. And the floating trap is looking at the entire line. So when you use the floating trap, you generally have to trap on every single field going across the column. And that makes this problem, in my view, worse because you've got a different number of fields on the different lines here. So instead of trapping on just a single field, we're going to have to come back here and say, well, my first field is all the way over here. I've got that in the wrong column. Now I've got my yellow background, so that's good. I can now highlight my quantity field, and I can highlight my description field and my label number field. So all of those are working okay because they all move relative to the position of the first numeric. But if I now come in and start highlighting my fields that are floating, you can see at the moment this hasn't fixed the problem for me because these fields do not move relative to the position of my first trap. So I've now got to come along here and say, okay, my second field has got a non-blank character, but now it's merging these fields together and I don't have the white anymore. So I've got to sort of really increase this. I've got to say, well, my first field, actually, I need to be on a blank and a numeric. My second field is a blank and any character. My third field is a blank followed by any character. And this now is going wrong because I've got spaces in my description. So actually what I'm going to have to say here is this field is actually two blanks. And now you can see by sort of increasing this pattern here, we are getting to where we need to go. So I've got blank and a numeric, and I've got blank and a numeric. I just need to nudge that across. So it is possible to come up with traps that's going to get the job done. I've made a mistake here somewhere. Yep, so I've got blanks and a numeric here as well. So this is going to have to be two blanks and a numeric. Okay, so you can see it is going to be possible, and it is usually possible, but there's normally a lot more work to do in terms of coming up with a floating trap that's going to get the job done. There's another little issue here you can see in that we've got some negative values here. So this last field here is not a blank followed by a numeric. It's a blank followed by a hyphen sign. So what we can do for this one is, rather than using the numeric trap, I can use the character list trap. And it takes a few seconds to arrive. Once the box is popped up here, and it's popped up in the background. Let me just, nope, there we go. Okay. We can now type in the numerics and the hyphen or the minus sign. So now a numeric or the minus sign is going to trigger that field for me. So you can see that that's fixing that problem there. So it is possible to use the floating trap. And to be honest, this is about as bad as it gets. You know, if you didn't have this description field with all the various parts in it, then obviously life would be a lot easier using the floating trap. But we still have a problem where we've got this single field here, and this actually is more difficult to fix using the floating trap, because the floating trap is saying that we basically got to have these 5 sequences, and of course on the field that's only got 4 fields, we've only got the 4 sequences, not the 5 sequences. So what I think I'd probably do here is maybe come back and not grab that last field as a separate field, and I'd still end up merging these two together. So, you know, it doesn't avoid the merging field situation. Or the other option we've got would be to, I'm just going to put the numeric in there just for now. The other option we'd have would be to say, all right, well, I'm going to extract it here on all the ones that have the two fields and accept that. And then I could bring the data in, or I could duplicate this. And on this one, instead, I would do two separate extractions. So I do one extraction that only has the single field. And then with this one here, I define the trap. I could probably come up with a trap that stops these, maybe by using some blanks out here. But even if that wasn't the case, I'd then be highlighting this, merging them together. And then on this one, I could split it. I'm not sure this is the best technique. I'm sort of thinking out loud as I'm talking here, which is never the right way of doing it. But no, I think actually, to be honest, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to do it that way. But we could, just to continue with this one, I could split it from the right into two parts. No, from the left, sorry. So I'm going to have to do a clean first and a remove leading and trailing, split into parts from the left. And now I could filter it. Yeah, I don't think this makes a lot of sense, but I'm just going to finish this off here. Filter field is null. So eventually I get back to my two lines that only contain the two fields. That's not the most efficient way, but yeah, I apologize for that. But you can see, you know, you can apply lots of techniques here where you can bring the data in multiple times, end up with two different tables. So my first table here is everything that's got three parts. My second table is everything that's got two parts. And then you can append those two tables to each other to get the final data set. So I apologise, I rushed that last bit, and that probably didn't make much sense there. But so I'm going to delete that last table. Okay, let me just check questions. I don't see any questions. Okay. Yeah, back to you, Rebecca. Yeah, thank you.
Yep, no worries. So everyone, thank you again for joining us. We're right on the dot. Steve, thank you. Great job as always. Have a great remainder of your day, everyone, and week, and we'll see you in April. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.